Hello, everybody. Tara Bachland here, and today I'm with Lori Rose. She, in her bio, which is absolutely amazing, she does often start off with she's a wife, mother, also teacher, professor at Hill College, and many other gardener. So many interesting qualities to Lori Rose that. An overall cool gal. So I look forward to chatting with her today. We actually met several years ago. Lori, I believe you contacted me, I think, in my early podcast days, and we just hit it off from there. And we've been on and off involved in making health and wellness podcasts or programs over this time. So I'm glad to be back on screen with you again.
Yeah, it's very exciting to connect with you. And we connect sporadically over the years, and so sometimes more frequently and sometimes less frequently. So it's always fun when we get together.
Totally. I think during the COVID time, we both had our nose to the grindstone too. So that was a bit of a sabbatical. But I think both of us are coming up for air or have come up for air. So it's fun to reconnect. So as I've explained before in these previous podcasts about becoming an herbalist, the point of these is to help those who are interested in becoming the herbalist. I put in air quotes because our teachers, Matthew Wood and Phyllis D. Light in particular, say, when you know how to use even one herb in a handful of ways, they're generous to say you're an herbalist, and that you don't have to know hundreds of herbs and hundreds of ways of using them. And I see Lori nodding her head. And there may be some who feel the calling to be, quote, be an herbalist outside their family and community. And so I'm wrangling up the people that I know who are herbalists in multiple realms to help you see the various ways that you can apply your herbal knowledge, interest, and skills. So, Lori, maybe share a little bit about you, what in your current life, how you, quote, practice herbalism.
Oh, sure. So in my current life, I practice herbalism all sorts of ways. So as you mentioned, I'm an educator in multiple schools actually, and so both folk herbalism and clinical herbalism is part of the way I sort of am an herbalist, right? So I'm an herbal educator. I also see clients through my own entrepreneurial practice, and so I practice clinical herbalism, but I'm also just sort of a family herbalist and a local community herbalist. So it's very common for people to just message me and say, hey, this happened. Do you make a product I can use? Or something will happen to my kids and they'll run up and be like, hey, what can I do for this? Which is nice. It took them a while to get there, but it's fun to see the outcome of oh, now they know they can come and, utilize my knowledge. And really one of my favorite ways to be an herbalist or to practice herbalism is just in my daily life, like herbs as food, herbs as drinks, herbs to just sort of spiritually connect to the earth. I find that one of the most rewarding ways to apply what I know about plants to my life to sort of, make my life more magical and better.
So there's so many. I was reviewing your bio today, which I didn't realize on your website you actually had your history, because it was perfect study material for today. And so, did you grow up in a family that was into herbs or herbalism?
So I absolutely did not. So my family so my mom's always been like an office manager for conventional medicine doctors. And so it's sort of funny, we laugh because we don't have to go to the doctor for medicine. My mom has not over the counter medicine cabinet she's always had in our life. She's got the real medicine for things that happen. So we really only went to the doctor for stitches. Everything else my mom could take care of us, but it was conventional medicine. And so I didn't even know herbs could be medicine. We were always my mom was always nutritionally minded, but in the way of like, if the USDA says it's healthy, we're going to follow those USDA rules. So it was like mom of the 80s, right? Skim milk, you had a meat, you had a veggie, and you had a carb. But it was, there were no like sugary snacks or sodas. And so I definitely was health minded and knew food was powerful, but I had never even considered herbs, not even with cooking. Like cooking was salt and pepper kind of thing. And so along my journey, it's a pretty funny story to how I came upon herbalism, and even the concept is food as herbs, or herbs as medicine. I had started to dabble in gardening because I wanted to grow my own food, because I realized the food you grow is more nutrient dense and more powerful nutritionally. And part of gardening is permaculture. So it's using all these other companion plants to attract pollinators and repel pests, and put chemicals in the soil that help your plants grow. And I didn't know how to use any of them. All of those companion plants were herbs. So two simultaneous thoughts were going on in my head. One, my friends would commonly be like, oh, I know this girl who's really into herbs, because they just assumed I was into herbs because I was growing herbs, right? And I would kind of roll my eyes like, oh, herbs is medicine. Like I totally poo-pooed it. While at the same time being totally scared to use the herbs in my garden because I didn't want them to hurt me. So I was like, oh, herbs don't work, but they can also hurt me. Completely conflicting ideas, right? And so I make fun of myself for that all of the time. But what happened is I went to this seed swap. So a local community herbalist who I owe all of my path to held a seed swap. And I went to a seed swap to get seeds for my garden. And one of the speakers there was another community herbalist, and she was talking about the plants that I was growing in my garden and how they can be used medicinally for this and medicinally for this and medicinally for this. And I was like, what the heck? And it just sparked everything. It sparked an insatiable curiosity to both use the plants that I was growing, but also learn everything I possibly could about using herbs as medicine.
So you have a biology background. So I'm knowing a bit about your timeline. I'm assuming this is after college and so forth?
Yes, this is after college. And so what's funny, another thing that's funny about this is I call myself like the hippie scientist. So I have my biology PhD. I'm a published scientist. So I'm very much into scientific rigor and scientific literacy, and I embed that into all of my education programs. But at the same time, it sounds conflicting, but it's not. I was doing all of this research on the efficacy of conventional medicine, the danger and side effects of conventional medicine. Not to say that there's not a time to use conventional medicine, but, I'm sort of shifting my mindset of like, oh, it's not like this effective all the time, safe all the time culture that we have in conventional medicine. And then environmental toxins and exposure in our body care products and our skincare products and our cleaning products. So I had moved completely away from using any conventional medicine, any environmental toxins, but I didn't know I could replace those things with effective herbs. So I was essentially suffering through any illness, big or small. It was just like, I'm just going to let my body take care of it. And I didn't really know that there were ways that I could be both improving my day-to-day health with herbs or addressing more acute things with herbs.
So you saying that your early research throughout your college years was leading you to discover that some of these medicines were not only not helpful, but not safe. And so you chose just to go cold turkey and not use any kind of conventional remedies?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it was cold turkey, but it was definitely like an extreme response. Like I didn't use over the counter medicine for 20 years. If I was congested, I lived through it. If I had a headache, I lived through it. If I had chapped lips, I wouldn't put chapstick on. Like I was
Oh,
very extreme. I'm not recommending this to people. I'm just describing like the mental journey I went through
yeah.
to eventually come to herbs.
I love doing these interviews because you hearing something like that, because a lot of times it's someone's journey, it's the healer's journey, right? Which is I had this illness and I conventional medicine wasn't working, and so I had to seek out other things. Where it sound and I know another part of your journey, which I want to get into also, but this is so fascinating where you went to school and under, you said you were going pre-med. I remember reading. And so, a very structured, oriented route. And it just kind of through your research, you kind of went and came to more of the natural approach because of your research.
Right. Yeah, it wasn't any health issue that led me one way or another. I always felt this innate connection to the earth, and that's actually the main reason I left pre-med. The research came later. I realized I didn't want to be inside all day all the time. I was like that's just not going to be the life I want to lead. I still want to help people. I still want to I didn't know if I wanted to do something health oriented or not, but I knew I wanted to be connected to the planet in some way. And so my bachelor's degree is actually in environmental biology, bioenvironmental science. And so that's more where I started to learn about environmental toxins, toxic exposure to body care products, etc. And so that sort of led me to learn um, potential dangers of conventional medicine and the conventional ways we address things, whether it's food or the environment and body care and skincare, cleaning, or the way we heal ourselves or address our maladies.
How would you address if you were to meet your prior self who was gardening and doing the companion gardening and thinking simultaneously these herbs could hurt me, but and at the same time they don't do anything? What would you do to that person now?
Well, luckily that didn't last very long because I went to that seed swap. But I would go back a little further to the person who was like, oh, let's shun all conventional things ever and maybe create a little nuance and say there's a time and a place for conventional medicine, but also let her know, like, just like food is medicine, plants are medicine, both daily use medicine and acute use medicine, because it was decades that I went just not having a way to address common ailments as they came up in my life. It was just like, okay, well, I'm suffering through whatever it is I'm suffering through. And luckily there wasn't like a big chronic illness, because who knows how long it would have taken me to finally turn to herbalism.
Yeah. It would have been the classic healer's journey
Yeah.
then. So one question I'd like to ask is when do you see when is the point for conventional medicine? Where is that line for you personally?
Oh yeah, that's going to be like a total personal choice, and it's going to be like a pro and con critical thinking decision, especially like if someone's choosing between chemotherapy and not. I think about that a lot. And I still don't know what I would do in that situation, but there was a time where I was like very black and white, like, oh, I would never blah blah blah, but I've softened over my older adult years and realize there's nuance to everything. But now it's like maybe sometimes I will use ibuprofen if I have a headache, and maybe sometimes I won't. Maybe sometimes if I'm suffering from allergies for 2 months and I've been drinking the herbal teas and they're not working. Maybe I'll dabble into over-the-counter stuff, when it used to very much be all or nothing. Well, it used to be nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there certainly are a lot of personal choices. Of course, if you have a broken bone, you're probably going to go.
Right. First aid, top notch, right? Like conventional medicine is amazing at first aid, but there's also amazing first aid herbs to even supplement the care you do get with conventional medicine. And even if I did go the route of conventional medicine, there are still always herbs to supplement and work with in conjunction with conventional medicine. And so I've gone from a very either or, all or nothing kind of mental space to, why shun things? Like let's use the best of both worlds when they're needed and when they're helpful.
I'll tell you, we live in such an amazing time for technology and what is available. A lot of the audience knows we've done a special on this, and uh, he was just chiming in. Just I was going to talk about him. My husband had an episode a little over a year ago where he had, well, there were various phases of it. The doctors think it was diverticulitis, but he had no prior symptoms or signs of diverticulitis. Essentially had a sepsis infection, peritonitis throughout his abdomen. His body amazingly sequestered all that infection into a fistula. And thankfully, the medical establishment was there, and we could get him. He had X-rays, CT scans, and they just took a big syringe basically and extracted a lot of infection and antibiotics. Oh my gosh. Once he got on a very strong antibiotic, his vitals came more closer to normal. I mean, there are acute phases where it is absolutely amazing what we have available to us.
Yeah.
So,
And what you just described, like I can totally see myself 20 years ago suffering through that and causing a ton of damage and not going to the doctor because I was so like, I don't even know the word, just one-sided, right? Like no nuance whatsoever. And now that's something where I'm like, oh, you need to go to the doctor. Like very clearly go to the doctor. And so I think I don't know if it's common or not, but I think it's a danger to ignore what conventional medicine offers because there are pros and cons, right? Just like I think it's silly for a whole culture to ignore the benefits of herbal medicine. And there are pros and cons with herbal medicine. And I think what it really takes is a nuanced critical thinking of understanding the pros and cons of both and understanding there's a time and place for both. And we don't have to pick and choose as part of our like herbalist identity. In fact, there's a danger to that.
Yeah, totally. I stand corrected. It was not a fistula. Once it was encapsulated, it was an abscess.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah. So live and learn for sure. I remember you saying another significant part of your journey was when you became pregnant, and that was another turning point for you.
Yes, that's absolutely when it was. That's when I got super into nutrition and super into researching food. And that's what stimulated me to even think about gardening. That was a turning point of my life to where it went from like textbook studying these things and like being interested in them and learning about them to actually making the priority to put that into practice. Like that was the time where I was like, oh, this is how I'm going to live. This is the environment I'm going to create for my children. This is what I want them to be exposed to as long as it's under my control. Right now, they do whatever they want. They determine their environment and the body care products and cleaning products they use. But as long as I had a say in it and a part of what they were learning, then natural living was going to be as close to what I could teach them as possible.
Mhm. We in our one of our earlier podcasts several years ago, we both shared the interest in story of body image and really, going pretty extreme in our food choices, exercise, and so forth to look a certain way, and shared similar but different journeys. And I remember you saying that, you're on this, and I was reading your bio today where you're sharing this story as well, that you're like running 6 miles a day, counting down to the noodles that you get per day. And the great turnaround in a sense was you're like, and then I became pregnant, and that just like whoop, got you to think differently. And I think that's the turning point for a lot of people, not just, well, especially women, but couples too. When they're expecting a child, they look at their environment and they think about things differently. Uh, yeah. Anything else to add to that?
Yeah,
So-
that was a crazy time. Here's the thing, like I thought I was doing the right thing by like counting every calorie, running 6 miles, tracking everything, because that's really what common nutrition guidelines are in this culture, right? Like that's conventional nutrition advice. And so I thought I was just doing what I was supposed to do, but I was totally over exercising. I was totally under eating, unbeknownst to me. And that happens to be when I got pregnant. And I'm thankful I did, because if I hadn't, then I probably would have gone down a very, very destructive path. But a couple weeks into my pregnancy, I got super dizzy and almost fainted. And that's when I was like, I started to investigate, like, why did that happen? And that's when I realized, like, oh, you're literally getting no energy input into your body, which is not only dangerous for the baby, of course, but it's dangerous for yourself. And so that was when I had this mental shift from food for body image or conventional nutrition paradigm to really like what nutrients and what food is it going to take to fuel my organ systems. And I'm not gonna lie and say that it's been like a clean 180, because we're bombarded with diet culture, body image culture. Like conventional nutrition advice has not gone away. With social media and the internet, it's even more pronounced. It's everywhere. And so it takes diligence, and it takes reminding myself frequently, I'm eating for fuel, I'm eating for fuel, I'm eating for my organ. Like it's easy to get lost back into that culture. And
Totally.
what's interesting about the timing of this question, like you're making me realize this is the period that my children are in now. Like my oldest child is a junior in high school, and she's an athlete, and she's starting to get really interested in food as nutrients as opposed to um that diet culture, because I watched her sort of go through it, and it had nothing to do with me because I never talked about diet culture with them. It was social media, right? Like they're just exposed to it. And so it's this fuzzy line between like educating enough to not make them like just turn away and ignore you, but also letting them live their journey. And it was hard watching someone live that journey, but I think she's making those healthful connections much younger and earlier than I did.
Yeah, it's got to be tremendously challenging. At least you got to start off with the products, right? I remember talking, and you're like, you're like, my daughter wants to wear makeup, and so we're exploring what are the healthier options.
Yeah.
So there are phases, fortunately, hopefully.
Yes. And a lot of it is letting go. And like, I have confidence that when they reach the part of their journey that they want to avoid environmental toxins, they want to eat to fuel their body, they know who to come to. They know they can come to me.
not to go off topic too much, but I think what's part of the challenge is there are people, and I've experienced this as well, who truly do have like food reactions.
Yeah.
And so there's this gray area between, okay, I mean, I remember cutting my diet, a lot of things out of my diet significantly to do the actual testing, right? And so you go back to just certain basic fruits and vegetables and then work in other things. And people, especially then, let's say 15, almost 20 years ago, it was not in the zeitgeist. And people were like, you're trying to starve yourself. I'm like, no, I'm trying to get
Right.
to the bottom of what's going on in my body. But there is a fine line because, and I personally experienced that where you're so concerned about what you're putting in, and it kind of perpetuates. I've experienced that it perpetuates that situation,
Right.
and then you run the challenge of, okay, is this healthy long term? I'm trying to make these diet changes because the other choices I was making were disturbing my gut and so forth. And so it's kind of a slippery slope from there, because then, a new years later, keto comes out, and, all these different diets. And it's really easy just to keep following the diet train.
Yes. Yeah, and it was like when I was in college, it was like South Beach, and then it went Atkins, and then, I could just keep going, right? And now we're all the way to like carnivorous diet. And there's so many, right? And you're right. For some people, those diets are therapeutic and they're necessary and they're healing. But even if that diet is a therapeutic healing diet for that person, it's easy to have a food fear manifest, right? And not want to think of it as like a temporary therapeutic diet, and instead think of it as, I'm only going to do this for forever and I'm scared to reintroduce or scared to change anything, because it really was causing pain and it really was causing health issues. And so it's just a tough arena out there in the food world. It just really is.
I sense another podcast coming out of this. I mean, that's a whole topic in and of itself. One more point, during that time especially, people would say, well, are you allergic? Out of concern, usually. And I would purposely not say that. I would say my body's just not appreciating that right now, because I
Yeah,
didn't want it to be a permanent thing,
right.
and was aware of, the speech, the mind body connection. So, nice little rabbit hole to go
Yeah,
down.
well, and it's extremely relevant because, something else to kind of circle it back to herbalists and the herbal path. It's important to note for herbalists that many, 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 many people coming to herbalism are doing so because of diet related issues, right? Whether it's food sensitivity or food allergies that need to be addressed, whether it's a malnourished diet, whether it's standard American diet. And so understanding food's impact on the body and the like mental game those food choices play with people and play with people differently, that's part of being an herbalist. And I know there's a lot of I've heard from herbalists that are like, I just want to study herbs, I don't really want to get into nutrition. And I'm like, I'm just not sure how well you're going to be able to help people because herbs are medicine, but food is like the foundation of health. And so um that's a tricky area too in herbalism, I think.
Yeah. I could see someone becoming a real specialist. There's sometimes that people are just so honed in and so good at their craft. Um, I think there's room for that, but certainly if you know the food and even some about exercise, you'll get a bigger picture.
Oh
You-
yeah, and if that's the case, like, and I hadn't even considered that, like, you could specialize as a herbalist, but and just know, like, have a nutritionist on your team, or have make sure to tell your client, like, I'm helping you with the herb part of your health, but this is just on top of the food part of your health that you need to find resources to help you work through. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
a totally great point.
Well, and of course, we're both holistic gals, and your program at Hill College is all about holism. So, no doubt you'd go down that path.
Right. I tend to have that like fully integrated perspective. So it's important for me to like step back and see like you don't have to learn all the things, but
Although,
know that you didn't learn all the things.
yeah, I see specialists as, and I've come to over the years also, like you were describing, to see things with more light, perhaps, and specialists in particular. That sometimes I used to wonder, like, how could they not see these other things? Why didn't they ask about their diet or how their relationships were? But sometimes I've seen someone who has a really myopic point of view, but they're really good at digging in. So
Yeah.
the person who's already explored all those other options, a specialist can be really helpful because they can really see things.
Yes, especially that a more generalist, wider knowledge base won't have the expertise and specialism to dive into, right? So there's just like what we were talking about, there's a place for all the things. It's not either or. It's there's different approaches to problems and to choices.
So back to your path. So not growing up with herbalism and initially going for pre-med, but you changed your route a bit because you didn't see yourself indoors all day. What were some of the other things that helped to steer you in this direction of becoming an herbalist, professor of teaching a holistic program? Maybe what were some of the things that you thought you might get into along the way? You know, because it's one of those things as we're figuring out our path. You're like, maybe I'll try this, or maybe that, and you kind of put yourself in that situation. And I'd like to hear some of those because someone else might be kind of on that path. Like, I like pre-med because I like the biology. I want to help people, but then they're like, that doesn't feel quite right.
Yeah, I think something. So I was already teaching at Hill College, teaching majors biology, and teaching nutrition to nurses when herbalism came into my vision. And like I said, the second I sat in that talk, at that seed swap, I was like, I have to learn everything about this. And so I took online classes from so many different herbalists. And I think one of the reasons why I was able to pick up herbalism so easily was because of my biology science background. Like it, and combined with my passion for all things environmental, right? Like passionate about the planet, passionate about biology. That's herbalism. And so I was already in a position to work herbs into my biology classes because one of the important things about being an educator of like general studies topics where everyone in the classroom may not be a passionate nerd like you is finding ways to make the lessons relevant. Like, who cares about learning about mitochondria if you don't make mitochondria relevant? Who cares about photosynthesis if you don't make it relevant? And so every herbal topic I was learning, it was like, oh my gosh, I could use this to teach about cells. Oh, I could use this to teach about diffusion. Oh, I could use this to teach about this. And so it just came naturally to me to infuse, pardon the pun, the herbal world into my program. And then once I learned there was this herbal certification, this all happened at the same time. I learned I could become a clinical nutritionist via online classes. I was studying clinical herbalism online, and I was studying health coaching online, just all separately at the same time I was teaching at Hill College. And I was pursuing these different national boards. And it occurred to me, like, I'm trying to pursue these three seemingly separate holistic topics at different schools, different curriculum, They each have their own like price tag that wasn't cheap. Why don't I teach all of these things at the same time? Because to me, they're all integrated, right? Like they're three legs of the same. Here, let me see if you can three. There we go. Three legs of the same chair. You can't have one without the other in my head. And so I just pursued that idea. Like, I'm going to create a school where you learn all of those things. And they're going to be biology classes because that's what I teach. And that's what they are. And it took a lot of work, and it took a lot of, like, can you imagine the dean of a college having an instructor come in and be like, I'm going to teach herbalism, like in Texas, at a college. And so at first it was like, okay, how are you going to do that? But I, went through the course catalog, and I'm like, it totally fits here. This fits here. This fits here. So I had to figure out all of the like state required curriculum and all of the bureaucracy to make it work. And I was super lucky to have a supportive team that let me pursue this, and it turned out to be amazing.
That was actually one of my questions, because holy cow, just to first come up with the idea and then, propose the idea. And there's a business venture in that too. The school has to see, if that's going to be viable outside, what is already, teaching nutrition to nurses is more standard these days. So that's
yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
Well, and to circle back to your original question, like things that worked and things didn't work, like that's what worked. But there's lots of other things that I've tried and dabble in as an herbalist that I didn't dislike doing, but I didn't love doing it as a business. So, for example, even just seeing clients one-on-one, that's something I like to do, but I would say that's like my fifth job, not even my second job. You know what I mean? That's something that's very background, and I'll help people, but I don't actively go out and find clients. I like doing it. It's rewarding. But with all the other stuff I'm doing, it's very time intensive. And maybe like in this stage of life, if my kids grow up and move out and I have extra time and mental space, I'll be able to dabble more in that. Another thing that I've dabbled in several times that I usually pull back from is creating an herbal medicine making business. And so I've sold products and herbs at booths and at farmers markets, and I've even ventured in having my products sold in local stores. And it's something that I always love doing at first, but when it becomes a demand thing, like when someone wants something that I don't have already made and I have to do it because I have to do it, then it took some of the joy away. And so those things, whereas someone else might be like, I love educating when I want to educate, but do I want to educate all day, every day for 16 weeks at a time with no break? Right? Like, I think it's important to experiment in all of the different ways you can use herbalism. Because another thing I did was grow herbs and try to sell my herbs online. And that was fun. And I liked it when people came. But if people wanted me to harvest and clean and dry, there were just things that I didn't want to do full time, but I only figured that out by doing them.
Yeah.
And pulling back whenever I met that internal resistance instead of forcing myself to do something that I didn't love.
I think what you hit on is such an important point. I'm so glad it's coming out in this part of the series is that experimentation. And a lot of times when my husband and I are, we'll speak to college entrepreneurial course classes and kids and stuff. And that's something we really encourage them to do is whether it's starting your own little business or just a part-time job. You learn as you're getting older and throughout life what you also it's just as important to learn what you don't want to do as what you want to do. And usually you start with what you don't want to do and you find your way. That's a beautiful illustration. Very important.
Yeah, and I think another important point about that is you can love to learn about something and not love to do that something. So
Mhm.
don't assume that just because you love learning about a topic that that's what you want to do. You got to do it to know if you like to do it. So
Yeah.
get out there and do it and see how you like it.
You know what's wonderful too is in our country, the United States, it is so relatively easy to start a business. And, or you could just start doing anything. You don't have to actually start a formal business until later. And so you can actually, you know, dabble in it, see how it goes, and then keep going or kick it to the curb. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just a matter of will, just trying it, just doing it. So glad you brought that up. Well, I can definitely tell you love teaching. Several years ago, I went down to Texas, which was a fun trip, and we filmed herbal medicine making for the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism, which was a ton of fun. It's one of our very few classes that are actually filmed on site. Most of them are via Zoom, and it was just a lot of fun. And it's really, I think, the essence of what herbalism is about is, being in your kitchen, being in your garden, being with other people, experiencing the herbs, and that we have the still for free online. I'll put the link below the tasting and sensing herbs. Remember at the end, so you had saved all of the herbs and or like the infusions or what was kind of left over, and it was brilliant. It worked out terrifically, and you had me taste them, and it was like we had made a rose hydrosol, and so what was left over was a very concentrated basically rose infusion. And
Yeah.
I didn't know what I was sipping. And you're like, okay, can you describe the flavors and the sensations? And it just ended up terrific. It was great. I mean, you really got to experience them to understand the herbal actions.
Yeah, because you can learn about like astringent herbs and demulcent herbs and relaxing nervines and stimulating nervines and expectorants, and you can read about and learn about the herbal actions. You can read about and learn about herbal energetics, but if you're not experiencing and ingesting and observing those herbs in action, it's all just words, right? Like, it's important to know that herbalism and life is supposed to be an experience. And so for me, it's especially challenging because I'm just like a book nerd to get myself out of the books and into experience. Like, don't sit and absorb so much. Get out and do more of the things and experience the things. And so if someone else is in that same situation where you're just learning and learning, like I've read all those herbal books, right? Like, which is awesome. It's great to be like that, to be an information absorber, but also be a doer, right? Like, go out and experience the herbs.
What are some ways that if someone has no idea on how to go out and experience some herbs, what would you suggest to them?
You 100% need to learn some herbalism first. So don't start with experiencing the herbs if you don't know anything about herbs, because not all plants are safe. Um, but you find an herbal teacher. It can be local. Find an herbal teacher online. Learn about a couple of local plants that grow around you. You can go on an herbalist herb walk or a botanist plant walk to learn about the plants around you. And then you can either like wildcraft and experience the herbs or go to an herb store, or even, y'all, just the teas, the herbal teas at the grocery store. Get different ones and taste them, right? And just try different types of herbs. See how they make your tongue feel, see how they make your body feel, see how they make your mind feel, and just like ingest the herbs.
Mhm. Yeah, get out there. I know, after doing some herb walks and actually getting to know the plants, walks are never the same. It is like seeing literally, like seeing friends that you haven't seen in a while, or you just recognize them, right? And you're going on a walk, "Oh, there's that. Oh, they're up and blooming now." And it's so much more interesting.
Yeah, and that I realized like I loved that way of starting to learn. But as I was talking, and that's why I kind of changed gears, like maybe that's intimidating to people, and that's okay too. Like you can go to the grocery store and get some herbal teas
Mhm.
and just taste them.
Yeah, there's many ways in. You know what's so interesting is when I first started getting into herbalism, I didn't even know it. I was basically apprenticing at an herb shop, although the herbs weren't like free form. They were in capsules, they were in,
Oh, like a supplement kind of herb. Yeah.
and she sold homeopathics and some health foods as well. And I was helping out and kind of apprenticing. And I remember asking one day, I'm like, what do I call you? Like, if I'm telling someone that I'm doing this with you, she's like, well, I used to be a nurse, but you can call me an herbalist. And I was like, oh, okay. And it's so interesting because there are so many ways in. It might be through food. We do a program with one of our team members. I do a program called Herbs and Spanglish with Alberto, and
Yeah.
always in or often the food element is included because many of the herbs also have a food quality to them. Not all of them, but at least the ones that we've been doing. And so that can even be a way in. It's absolutely amazing how foods uh, we think are just like normal. Oh, you just eat this at this time of the year. This is what's in season, but they actually have medicinal qualities. It's really amazing.
Yeah, if you look into the history of like why we drink chai in winter, or why we consume watermelon in summer, like there's so much ancestral wisdom
Mhm.
tied to modern culture that we don't realize.
Absolutely. Absolutely incredible. So, what else is interesting you now these days? Because you are a gal that's, always curious, always learning. What's been on your mind and interesting you as of late?
So um that's an interesting question. So, and this is something I've actually been like mentally toying, not toying, but grappling with recently, is I'm at this weird stage where being a parent of teenagers is so mentally consuming that I have no interest in learning things right now. My struggle is committing to utilize the things that bring me joy. Like it brings me joy to drink nourishing infusions. It brings me joy to make astragalus and mushroom broth for all the soups. It makes me happy to drink rose hips and hibiscus and tulsi and all these herbs. And as free time dwindles, committing to that also dwindles. And so, really, it's more of a mental commitment to myself to like keep the herbs close,
Mm.
right? Like keep doing this. Keep doing what you're doing. Don't let this fall by the wayside. Don't let the teenagers who want to use their body care products and use their, at the beginning I was like, this is the culture I want to create in my house, and they're getting more independence and more money and more freedom, so outside things are starting to come in, both literally and figuratively. And so this is a stage where most of the work is recommitting to the decisions I made years ago to keep the plants close, keep the environment as a priority, and keep being that example, whether or not other people are at the stage where they're following that example yet.
Isn't it fascinating how things come full circle, though? Like you're saying, you're coming back around to or revisiting keeping the plants close, and what is it that you can do at this stage of their lives, right? What do you hold on to? I think I'm hearing, what do I hold on to? What do I let go?
Yes.
And supporting yourself, I think, which is a very helpful message for women, where again, going to our culture, there's really a pull or a push to always be growing, always be expanding, always be doing. And what I heard you say is you're actually not doing that intuitively, and it sounds like both intuitively and on purpose.
Yeah. Yeah. I it feels like what I've sort of come into accidentally is like a maintenance phase. Which is weird because I'm terrible at maintenance. So it makes sense that it's something that I'm like thinking about and having to be really intentional about. I'm really great at new things and change and creating, but maintaining, it's not a talent that I have. I want to keep going and going and going and going. And so it has been just sort of a natural progression that I've noticed and that I've had to accept it and grapple with it and be okay with it. So I love the way that you worded that.
Well, I appreciate too that you didn't struggle or strive to get an answer to answer that question. Just be like, no, I guess the newness is kind of going inwards and in revisiting. And so I appreciate that too. It's a good reminder. And what's fascinating too is when sometimes when we take that step back, I'll speak for myself, when I've been like, I'm going to purposely not go out and try to create and do. And sometimes it's a struggle. Well, usually it is, when I have to consciously think of that. But it brings with it its own lessons, like things you couldn't have learned by trying. You had to not try.
Yeah.
So it's beautiful. It's beautiful life lessons.
Yeah. Not many people talk about that part of it, right? Like it's goal setting and improving and doing and like, okay, what are we going to change now between now and the next session? What are we going to change? Like, okay, let's
Mhm.
just sit with this a little bit. Like, let me just be this for a while. Because there's other people changing. Like right now, the other people in my life are changing so drastically that that's enough change for me to have to process.
Yeah, totally. I think a good ending note would be, it's always inspiring and interesting to hear, what you've seen in your life. What keeps you inspired and interested in your field of work? Uh, what might have been some one of your students chimed in a while back. The HWP was life changing, your program. I loved learning from Dr. Rose. And so I imagine you've seen transformations in students, not just from herbs, but through that experience. Are there any either herbal changes or program life changes that you've seen that really have just, you know, filled your heart and just, you seems like you're going to keep going anyways, but just kind of keep that fire in you?
Oh, yeah. That's so. There's a lot of things I want to say to that. One of the things that have really helped me maintain my commitment and priority, since we were kind of on that topic, is the fact that I do teach these things to students. Like doing webinars about herbs keeps the herbs close to my life. The fact that I have my students every semester watch the movie Embrace helps me remember, like, diet culture is BS, food is energy, nutrients, nourishment. And so being an educator has helped shine back my priorities back to me, and that has been extremely important, to keep me in the place where I want to be. The other thing I want to say is like a more direct answer to your question, which, because my program prioritizes hands-on learning and integrating all of those holistic facets. So we don't just learn about herbs, we don't just learn about nutrition, we don't just learn about mental and emotional wellness. We learn about all of those things, and not in a passive way, but in a very experiential way. Every single student I've ever had has told me that. Because we do like these private, we call them wellness journals, and they essentially go through this process of like facing your fears, looking at your mental and emotional barriers, figuring out how to overcome them, etc. And every semester after that, there are just stories of like, if all I did was take this one class, it was life changing. But then also, like in the nutrition class, it's like, I had this health issue or this health issue or this health issue. So this was so life changing. Or just learning about the herbs. I came here for the herbs and this was so amazing. And even people who didn't come here for the herbs, I had no idea I was going to be interested in herbs. It was amazing. So I think that feedback is so magical and amazing and fueling. And that combined with the fact that it keeps me on track is definitely the evidence that staying in education, that's definitely one of the things that is just me, that will always be a part of my journey, however it shows up.
Are there any common ailments that you see are ameliorated?
Like digestive things, mental things, like pain, muscular pains, headache type thing. I mean, everything, right?
Yeah, I figured there might be some commonalities, because there's some where when you just cover the holistic concepts, there are some common ones that it can really,
Like
really help.
energy, hormones, PMS, things that like avoiding the processed stuff and the toxins, giving yourself whole food forms of foods, but then also dealing with your mental stress, and then also learning you have to sleep sometimes, and then also you got to go outside, and then here's herbs you can drink, and here's herbs you can take, and yeah, like it's just that combination is just so powerful.
Imagine if we learned this in elementary school, or everybody got to learn it at home, if it
Right.
was part of your life.
Yeah, and like even though my program is to create clinicians, right? Is to create clinical herbalists and clinical nutritionists who can see clients. I tell them like even if you just come through this as a client, like as a student, you will come out having benefited because you're doing all these things to yourself first going through the program.
Totally. Yeah, that was my experience when I did yoga teacher training. I didn't have aspirations of becoming a teacher, but I was encouraged to do it just for my own journey. And that was a whole new concept for me. Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
It was wonderful. And I think a beautiful note to end on.
Wonderful. Well,
It's
thank
always,
you so much. This was a lovely conversation.
as always, thank you. And I feel some future ones coming on as well.
Sounds good. You just let me know.
So where can people find you and get in touch with you?
Oh goodness. So my Hill College way to find me is www.hillcollege.edu and then /holistic wellness. You could also just search like Hill College Holistic Wellness. That should come up. And email LoriRoseHolistic@gmail.com.
And that's your website.
Oh, and then just my website, Lori Rose Holistic at WordPress or .wordpress.com.
Wonderful. You'll find some great information there. And we'll put some links down below as well. We have an early class that we taught that's free. That's a holistic sun health class from back in the day. You'll see earlier versions of ourselves, but it's still totally relevant. And I'll put a link also to the tasting and sensing herbs, which is a great free class as well. You'll get to see me making some really odd faces. But we recommend you try it out for yourself as well. Experience the herbs.
Yes.
That's the best way to learn for sure. Well, wonderful to see you. Thank you so much for taking the time, Lori.
Absolutely. Have a great one.
Bye-bye.